from one mark to another. And it's my great pleasure that I'm joined by one of the most celebrated Olympians, a man who competed at 7 Olympic golds. He won gold at his first Olympics in 1984 in Los Angeles, and he went right the way through until 2016 with 5 medals. He also won 5 badmintons, or five Burleys, I should say, and 4 badmintons. And here's just a little taster of his great success.
Bold, totally ignoring any possibilities that it might be dangerous.
One more fence to jump and Mark Todd is clear. And look at this, he's absolutely spot on. Tremendous horse and ride. Whoa, he's enjoying it.
Very impressive test, and he finishes up with 44.2.
And he takes it. The champion here at Burghley, 1997, his 4th Burghley success.
Very responsive, very relaxed, listening to everything that he says.
Mark Todd, Diamond Red. Well, how close is he going to be to the clock this time? And he's home, and he's clear.
And now he is turning his hand to training racehorses once again. Sir Mark Todd, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Nick.
And some wonderful memories over such a long and glittering career. Dare I say it, did you have to be prized out of the saddle again when you retired for the, I think it was just the 2nd time, or was it the 3rd time?
Yeah. No, I first retired in 2000 and then got sort of coerced back into it, I guess, a bit in 2008. But when I retired, when was it? 2019. I was well ready to stop by then.
And you've said in the past that the adrenaline was something you were finding it very hard to get out of your system. How does now training racehorses compare? Is it replicating that buzz, sort of?
Yeah, well, it does, sort of, as you say. You know, there's nothing quite like the buzz you get riding a good horse around a course like Badminton or Burghley, but the excitement of having a good racehorse and running in decent races, which I haven't yet over here, but I was fortunate enough to have it a bit in New Zealand when I was training there. It's a different sort of buzz, but it still gets the adrenaline going.
I just want to go right back to the beginning, because one of the things I find most fascinating about you, unlike most international event riders or international horse people, you had no background in horses at all. And in 1984, you were winning an Olympic gold with your first ride there, the Your Horse of a Lifetime Charisma. How did you go from there to there?
Well, I just grew up with a passion for horses, and I was fortunate enough. My grandfather, he had a farm, and although he was involved in horses, he had a farm hack, and his neighbour was a well-known New Zealand equestrian called Kenny and Ann Brown, and I ended up borrowing a pony off them from the beginning, and that's sort of how it started. And I was fortunate enough, my family sort of were able to sort of help me get going as best they could, and it just sort of went from there.
How young were you when you knew that this was what you wanted to do?
Well, back then when I first started, it was never. I never thought of it as a career. It was a sport. It was a hobby. I actually wanted to be a jockey. I was very small until I was about 16, and I used to ride Trackwork for a local trainer. But then I sort of started to grow, and I guess I could have gone down the racehorse training route at an earlier stage, but I just loved riding so much that I wanted to carry on with a riding career.
And that early experience riding Trackwork, did that stand you in good stead? I suppose it made you a bit different from your other competitors, didn't it?
In fact, a lot of the New Zealand event riders have ridden Trackwork at some stage or another. Blythe Tate was another one, and Janelle and Tim Price now, they've all ridden racehorses. It gives you a very good idea of speed and travelling at speed and becoming comfortable with speed, and which I think stands you in good stead on the cross-country phase.
Because all the people you mentioned are brilliant clock riders, aren't they? I mean, latterly, Tim and Janelle, but Blythe and yourself before that, just brilliant at riding to the clock.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it also in New Zealand, it gets drummed into you. You have to ride each furlong, whether it's 20 seconds of the furlong or 18 or 15, and if you're riding consistent track work, you have to be able to do that. and so I guess that's a good way of teaching it.
Did you ever deviate during your teenage years from wanting to be around horses and on horses? Was there ever any suggestion of you going off and doing anything else?
Well, funny enough, I was quite good at athletics, but it was never, for me, it was never a choice. You know, I just wanted to do horses, and so that's the route I took.
And you got your agriculture diploma. Was that something that you sort of felt you needed to fall back on?
Well, I was always going to be a farmer. In fact, I was dairy farming for a while. I started off when I left school. I went and worked on a dairy farm, and then eventually I took over my grandfather's farm and was milking cows there. But I soon realised that wasn't really where my heart lay, so I changed direction. And in fact, when I did decide to do it, I sold up the herd of cows. I went and bought 2 yearling fillies at the sales, and one of them was no good, and the other one was a very good race mare called Sounds Like Fun, and this was in the 80s. And she was with a trainer called Jim Gibbs, and she was one of the top mares of her era.
So you were getting a huge thrill from your involvement in racing, even all the way back then.
Yeah, and so much so that my wife and I got married in 1986, and she was due to run in the Oaks then, and it was do we go on honeymoon to the Maldives, or do we stay and watch the Oaks? And my wife's never forgiven me that we actually stayed and watched the Oaks.
You did stay and watch the Oaks. You're a very lucky man, Mark. Very lucky man. This was 2 years after you'd won your first Olympic gold on Charisma, and you were still a very young guy then in the early stage of your career. You always amuses me. You always make it sound as though things just kind of happened. But the amount of work required to get yourself and an equine athlete to an Olympic Games on another continent and to win gold, that shouldn't be underestimated, should it?
Well, I guess, but I mean, it's in some ways, I guess I am a good planner. In other ways, things just do seem to happen, and you know, I think you set a goal and then you set a path towards achieving that goal, and I guess that's what I did do. And I've never been afraid to work hard to get there, and because, you know, working with horses, it doesn't always seem like it's hard work, because it's what you love doing.
So tell me a little bit about Charisma for those who aren't old enough to remember or didn't have an interest in eventing it in those days. He was a legend, really.
He was an amazing little horse. He was actually 15/16th thoroughbred, and the other 16th was French draft horse Percheron. So where that came from in New Zealand, I don't know. But he was only 15/3, and he was a fantastic looking little horse. He was incredibly sound. He was a great athlete, and he just loved the job. And I guess, you know, his two strengths were the dressage phase. He was very good in the dressage phase, and he was brilliant cross country. Even at the age of 16, when we won our second gold medal, he had the fastest time around the cross country endurance phase, and the vet said he had the best recovery rate of all the horses there that day. So.
Amazing, absolutely amazing horse, and he won two Olympic golds, and the second one was almost. I'm not going to say a cakewalk, but it was almost easier than the first one.
It was, yeah. He led the dressage, and then I think we ended up winning. We always used to have a pole in hand going into the show jumping, because he used to like jumping by braille, and occasionally he got it wrong and would have one down. And I think we went into the show jumping phase with 3 rails in hand, which was a fairly comforting thought going into that final day, and I think he had one down, but still won.
You say he was a sort of 15/16th thoroughbred, did you say? So
yeah.
Almost a complete thoroughbred, and you had great success on thoroughbreds through most of the sort of first phase of your eventing career. What can they do for you that other horses can't?
Well, I just love their minds. You know, they were great. And in those days, when you had the long format 3-day, when you had the roads and tracks and the steeplechase, they had the stamina to do it, and the warm bloods used to struggle. And going around the cross country, you know, you never really got out of third gear, and the poor old warm bloods, you know, they were at full throttle the whole way, and quite often didn't quite, you know, they couldn't go that fast for that long. You know, back in those days, the cross countries used to be 12 or 13 minutes, and you really had to have something with an engine.
After you have a horse like that, who you've described as a horse of a lifetime, how hard is it then to adapt, to try and find new horses, to bring on youngsters? How hard did you find that at the sort of back of the 80s, early 90s?
For eventing?
Yeah.
Well, we used to buy a lot of horses out in New Zealand. We used to, I don't know, we looked all over the place. There was, you know, Ireland produced a lot of very good event horses back then. The classic 7/8 thoroughbred with a bit of Irish draft, and they were excellent as well.
What would you say was your single greatest achievement as an event rider?
For doing it so long, I think. And why? But I don't know. I think one of obviously the 2 gold medals were amazing with Charisma, but I think one of the things that made me most proud was coming back after 8 years off with a horse that Sir Peter Vella purchased for me, a horse called Land Vision, and going back to badminton. And winning that in 2011, which I don't know how many years after my first win, and you know, everybody thought that, you know, because I'd had 8 years off, it was the sport had moved on. It was going to be very difficult for me to be competitive. So to go there and win that I felt was you know, a huge achievement.
Yeah, 80 I think was your first badminton, so 31 years, and the 15 years since the previous one.
Yeah.
That must have been an amazing day. And to what extent did you really feel the warmth of the whole equestrian community?
Well, I mean, it is a wonderful community, you know, especially in eventing, and it was great. It was great to be welcomed back with open arms, and I can remember, like, my good mate Lucinda Green. You know, we were obviously talked about coming back and all the rest of it, and she was at the arena as I walked out of the show jumping, and I just went, you know, how did that happen? And so it was, the reception was tremendous.
And there was talk, wasn't there, after sort of 16, that you might kick on even longer, and you decided to call it a day. Why ultimately did you decide not to press on to? Oh, it would have been this year's Olympics, I suppose, in Tokyo.
Olympics, yeah. I'd been cutting down on numbers, and although I had a couple of horses that I did have a couple of horses that were could have been real chances, and one of them was a little horse called McLaren that reminded me an awful lot of Charisma, and he's now gone to Janelle Price, who's probably a much better fit for him because he was even smaller than Charisma. But you know, it's the motivation as much as anything. You know, you can't compete at that top level if you're not putting 100% in, and I didn't feel I was putting 100% in. I wasn't getting any younger, and then I had this sort of out of the blue proposal from Sir Peter Vella, who'd bought Eminent outright, and initially he came to me, and Peter sent him to me and said, you know, would you just look after him? He's coming back to New Zealand to go to stud. So I had Eminent. We had Eminent at our place, and the next thing he sort of rings up and says, well, you know, why don't you take him to Australia? We think we might race in there. Why don't you take him there and we'll give him a couple of runs in Group 1 races? And it was, you know, never one to shirk a challenge. It took me a wee while to think about it, but then we sort of thought, oh, well, we'll have a go. But then the logistics of that happening started to kick in. You know, I didn't have a licence.
Yeah.
I had to get a licence. Luckily, it was just within the 10-year time limit of when I'd previously held a licence, which enabled me to take a few shortcuts. But the BHA were very good over here and helping me push it through. And it literally, the horse had to be nominated for the Ramvet Stakes in Australia and by a certain day. And the trainer had to have a licence to be able to nominate it, and it came down to about 2 days. I think I had 2 days. My licence came through and we were able to nominate the horse for the race.
And he finished second, didn't he?
He finished second in that race.
So it's a good start.
It was a good
decent start to a training
helps
career
when you have a very good horse.
Yeah. And so from there, did it just feel right? I mean, I know you trained a bit before in that interim period between the eventing careers, but did it just feel like the right move?
It did, and like I say, I'd trained in New Zealand and we'd had a reasonable amount of success there. But England or Britain is to me, has always been the home of racing, if you like, much like it's the home of eventing. People in other countries probably disagree, but I mean, you have such a wonderful history of racing over here and everything, and I just thought, it'd be wonderful to. And another challenge to see if I can, train some winners here. You
like giving yourself stern challenges, don't you? Getting to the '84 Olympics, yeah. Making the comeback you described as a bit of a dare. I mean, this is a big challenge still. I'm interested in how you feel as someone who's achieved so much and has been right at the pinnacle of your sport, having to almost work your way up through the ranks again.
I'm starting at the bottom again. My previous life, that's all history now, isn't it? You can almost say it was last century. And as people say, you've got to look forward. You've got to have plans and keep moving forward. And horses I love doing, and this is a new challenge. I've been very fortunate that Sir Peter Vella, has backed me with horses, and then other contacts we've had through eventing for years, like Madeline Lloyd Webber. Mm-hmm. I've known Madeline forever. In fact, I used to teach her years and years ago, and I rode a horse for her at Badminton when she was having her first child. Lady Bamford and Sir Anthony Bamford. We lived on their estate for a while, and I rode an event horse for them, and they've sent me a horse, and so those connections we've had for a long time, and obviously, they're very big into racing, and so it's having those sort of people being able to get behind you has been a big bonus.
And these big racing yards now are a lot about systems and efficiency and routine. Do you still believe that you can bring your supreme skills as a horse person to the art of training a racehorse? Is there still an art to it?
I think there's an art in horsemanship, and I think that's where I have an awful lot of experience about having horses being very well and ready to perform at their best. After that, I think training racehorses is about having a system, and within that system, and finding a system that works for a start, and then within that system, allowing for each individual to fine-tune it so that you can get the best out of that horse. And I'd be the first to admit that, it's taken me a year or two to work out the gallops. We've had to redo the gallops and how we use the gallops. But I started with a bunch of yearlings and 2-year-olds, and a lot of them needed a bit of time, and I think we're only just starting to see the fruition of that patience with them.
Are you enjoying it?
I'm enjoying it now. We're having a few winners. Yeah, it was fairly frustrating there for a while.
See, that's the thing that immediately struck me about you. You're not in this to play around, are you?
No, I mean, why would you be? I mean, it's not a game you just play for fun. And I'm a super competitive person, as my wife and family will tell you. And it's I don't mean it in a crass sort of way, but winning is everything really, and certainly in racing. And well, even in eventing, everybody remembers the winner. Nobody remembers who finished second, and that's what it's all about.
But the one thing that you have always been able to do almost instantaneously is to get inside a horse's mindset, it seems. Was that something you always enjoyed, getting on a horse for the first time? And
I think that's one of the skills I have is being able to understand and read horses a bit. And I think that's so important to get the best out of them. You've got to understand their little quirks and their ways, and I think because we're a small team, we can have that individual attention, and hopefully it will pay dividends.
I was just reminded when you were saying that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sort of remembering from my youth watching on. You got on. Was it Lynn Bevan's horse at the last minute and rode him to win at Badminton?
Yeah.
Was it Porton Point?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so just tell the story.
Well, there was two horses.
Familiar.
There was Horton Point.
Was it sort of mid-90s?
Something like that.
Yeah.
She'd had a fall the week before and broken a collarbone, and I had another ride on a horse that year, a horse called Justin Ace, and they rang up and said, would you ride Horton Point? And obviously I knew the horse. He was 16 years old, and he'd been around with both Ros and Lynn Bevan and been a great old campaigner, but he was like half Irish draft, and he'd never got round inside the time. But he was very good in all the other phases, and so it was an easy one for me. You could do it back then. You can't do that now.
They wouldn't allow you to do it now, would they?
You can't take chance rides.
No.
And I was number one to go. He did a really good dressage. I think we were second at the end of the day after the dressage. And then, bless him, he went round the cross country and we were inside the time. He was actually quite sore at the end of that.
He'd never been so fast in his life.
And we very nearly didn't trot him up for the vet inspection the next day, but then we thought, well, we were in the lead. What have we got to lose? So, that horse just wanted to do it. He got on the trot up strip, and he absolutely trotted up 100% sound. And then he went and show jumped clear and won it. So, and then I had another ride on Rodney Powell's horse, the Irishman, and he had the same sort of scenario. He had fallen off the week and injured himself, and unfortunately, we had a fence down the show jumping and only finished second that year. But
I'd say that's a pretty fair return for two spare rides at the last minute, a win and a second at the big.
But it's they were good horses, and because I'd ridden a lot of horses, I could get on these horses and say, well, and just let them do themselves and give them the help they needed, and they did the job.
And are you still riding quite a lot? I
still ride, yeah. That's why I do this. I love riding, and I love the training of the horses, but I seem to end up getting on all the tricky ones.
Yeah, I feel reluctant in saying this because I don't want suddenly everyone to pick up the phone and send you every basket case that's out there, because obviously you're going to offer so much to those. But if you get sent a horse that perhaps another trainer hasn't got on so well with, would you get on that horse and give and have a pretty good idea of where you want to go with him or her?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, racehorses are very different to event horses, but all the horses that we have that we started off, the first thing we teach them is to be out, that you can actually ride them and steer them, and they can do basic stuff, and that makes them more rideable. And most of the people that have ridden for us say, how generally, not all, generally how well behaved and rideable they are. So, which is good. So
it's good to be well behaved and rideable. Now you need them to run fast as well.
To run fast. Well, yeah. Most of them can. That's what they're bred to do, and some can run faster than others. And if you train them correctly, hopefully you can get the best out of them.
The good news is that you do look to have a horse who can run quite fast already in your yard, and that's Tasman Bay, who finished third at Newbury. It's a conditions race, but it is sort of recognised as an early pointer to classics and whatnot. That's Maximal, the far side in the pink cap, and Tasman Bay's the dark bay third from the left in the Sir Peter Vella colours. Were you pretty pleased with this?
I was very pleased with him. He'd won at Newcastle at his first start this year over a mile. He's a lovely horse. He's a great big horse by Le Havre out of a Galileo mare, and his second dam is peeping form. So he's bred to stay. I don't think the race was run to suit him. There wasn't a lot of pace early, and then it turned into a bit of a sprint home, which I don't think suited him. And because he's such a big horse, we haven't put a lot of pressure on him to really get him going yet. I think he's probably going to be a better horse in the autumn. We have eyes on the Derby. Well, he's entered for the Derby. I guess the next start he'll either run at Newmarket in the Fairway Stakes or at Newbury in the City of London handicap for 3-year-olds. And he'll have to do something fairly smart in that to warrant having to go at the Derby, I guess. But, you know, as we all know, the Derby's looking quite open at the moment. But I suppose Aidan OBrien can turn up with a maiden or something on Derby Day and win it. But
is it hard to prepare a horse like him, who I'm guessing he's your best horse?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Is it hard to prepare him if you haven't got horses of comparable ability in the yard?
Yeah, we've got nothing that can go with him. So we have to give his gallop mate a fair head start, and he can sort of try and pick them up. Yeah.
And is the setup, Mark? Do you think it is equipped to expand and grow? Could this become a training operation of some substance?
Yeah, I don't want to be training 200 horses, that's for sure, or even 100. You know, we've got 40 stables. If I could fill those stables, that would be brilliant. And you know, at the moment, we've only got probably 12 in work, and so, you know, we've had 6 winners this year, which is, you know, I'm quite happy with that.
Yeah.
They've been running well, so hopefully we can build on that. And if I can get into double figure winners for the year, and maybe pick up a decent race with Tasmanian Bay along the way, and we've got a couple of other nice ones. So you know, we'll see.
And just going back to where you started with that victory in 2011. At Badminton, that comeback victory, and I could see it was a moment that meant so much to you. Is there something you could achieve in this sport that would elicit that same sort of emotional response?
Well, I think winning a Group 1 race, and you know, I'm not going to be picky here. Any Group 1 race would be huge. I always had a hankering to have a horse run in the Arc de Triomphe, and I think you showed a clip of Willie Smith winning the Wellington Cup in New Zealand, and we always sort of had a thought that maybe bringing him over to have a crack, but that didn't happen. So, if I had a horse good enough to, well, I'd love to run in the Derby, obviously. You know, to even have a horse that we're even talking Derby is great. Whether it happens or not, I don't know, but you know, one of those big prestigious races would be great.
Well, as you said, you like to set yourself goals, and thus far in your life, most of those goals have been achieved. I think it would add a great richness to this sport if there was more success from the Sir Mark Todd yard. So thanks so much for coming in, and all the best.
Thank you, Nick.
Sir Mark Todd, Olympic legend and now racehorse trainer, and perhaps pointing towards the Kazoo Derby on the 5th of June with Tasman Bay.